Welcome, friends. You're watching Ruslan Bailov, and today is April 11th, 2026. It's been an extremely packed day. Events are unfolding simultaneously across multiple theaters: Ukraine, the Middle East, and the political front in Central Europe. Let's break it all down, in order, without filler. Ukraine, the Easter ceasefire and preparations for a new escalation. Let's start with the main story. Today at 4 p.m. local time, the Easter ceasefire came into effect on Ukrainian territory. It was announced the day before by the President of the Russian Federation. Ukraine broadly accepted and agreed to the terms. On the surface, it looked like a moment to breathe. In reality, the picture looks fundamentally different. Right up until 4 p.m., meaning throughout the entire night of April 10th into the 11th and the morning of the 11th, both sides continued to strike intensively, deploying hundreds of drones. The ceasefire took effect at the agreed hour, but in practice both armies are using this pause not to rest, but to prepare as aggressively as possible for the next round of escalation. By all indications, the coming days could be among the most intense since the start of 2026. Russian strikes on the eve of the ceasefire. Ukraine's Ministry of Defense recorded that on the night of April 11th, the Russian side deployed 160 drones to strike critical infrastructure targets. That is a significant strike even by the standards of recent months. But the quality of these attacks matters just as much as the numbers. A fundamental shift in tactics is underway. Russia is rapidly transitioning from first, second, and third generation drones to fourth and fifth generation systems equipped with machine vision. What's the critical difference? Previous generation drones flew to preset coordinates. Operators often had no way of knowing whether the strike had achieved its objective, and the effectiveness of any individual aircraft remained uncertain. New generation drones transmit a live video feed in real time and, crucially, are capable of autonomously correcting their flight path upon detecting mobile targets within the strike zone. This development strikes directly at one of Ukraine's key tactical innovations: mobile fire groups. These units were specifically created to intercept Russian drones, small, mobile teams with light weapons that reposition rapidly along drone flight corridors and engage them on approach. Against older generation systems, this tactic worked reasonably well. Against machine vision, it no longer does. The drone detects the group itself, locks onto it, and either engages directly or relays coordinates for a strike by other means. The mobile fire groups have effectively become the hunted rather than the hunters. The shift to fourth and fifth generation drones is not simply a technological upgrade. It is a potentially decisive factor in the overall logic of the conflict. And here is why. A single drone equipped with machine vision and a guaranteed strike outcome replaces 10 older systems of uncertain effectiveness. The economics of warfare are changing, and changing significantly. Odessa Oblast under systematic pressure. Odessa Oblast came under heavy strikes once again. According to available data, at least 25 drones were deployed against industrial targets in the region on the night of April 11th. But the single-night figure is less important than the broader pattern. Russia has been striking this direction for several days in a row, methodically and deliberately. The day before, footage emerged showing fuel storage tanks being hit in Odessa Oblast. The video clearly shows liquid pouring through punctures in the tanks. Earlier, footage from the Izmail area showed a strike on a tanker. The strategic logic behind these strikes is transparent. Odessa Oblast is currently the primary corridor for fuel supplies entering Ukraine, both to stabilize the country's civilian energy market and to sustain the combat capability of the armed forces. Severing or significantly disrupting this flow is Russia's current strategic priority on this axis. Ukrainian strikes on Russian infrastructure. Russia's Ministry of Defense reported the interception of 99 Ukrainian drones on the night of April 11th. Ukraine, for its part, continues systematic strikes against southern Russian regions, pursuing two parallel objectives. The first, the destruction of oil extraction and export infrastructure. Overnight, strikes were recorded against oil platforms in the Caspian Sea area. Corresponding footage was published by Ukrainian sources. Notably, according to available information, the drones operating in this area were guided via Starlink terminals. The objective is clear: reduce Russia's export capacity and squeeze its budget revenues. The second objective, suppression of Russian air defense systems across southern Zaporizhzhia and Kherson Oblasts. This is not a standalone goal, but an enabling one, clearing the airspace for subsequent deeper operations. The pattern is a classic two-layer scheme. One element suppresses air defenses, the other strikes infrastructure targets. Patriot missiles and the expected mass strike. Ukrainian President Zelensky today announced the receipt of another batch of Patriot missiles. Important context is needed here. Ukraine learned long ago that keeping Patriot systems and their munitions permanently on its own territory is too risky. They become priority targets for Russian intelligence and strike assets. The likely real scheme works differently. Western and Ukrainian intelligence monitors indicators of large-scale Russian strike preparations. Once sufficiently reliable data arrives about an incoming combined mass strike, missiles are rapidly transferred from stockpiles in Poland and Romania. The announcement of a new batch is either a public signal that genuine strike defense preparations are underway, or an information bluff to mislead the adversary. In this case, however, all indicators point to the first scenario. With a high degree of probability, Russia is preparing a major combined strike in the coming days, deploying several hundred drones, a significant proportion of which will be new generation systems, along with dozens of missiles. The strike will not come on the night of the 12th. The ceasefire is still in effect. The most probable windows, late evening on the 13th or the night of April 13th to 14th. Russian force concentration on the Zaporizhzhia axis. Direct confirmation of these expectations comes from equipment movement data. Ukrainian monitoring channels are tracking the transfer of at least 50 armored vehicles to the Huliai area on the Zaporizhzhia axis, and this is happening right now, during the ceasefire. The logic is transparent. Huliai sits directly adjacent to the front line. Keeping a large armored formation there for any extended period is not feasible. Once the ceasefire ends and intensive combat resumes, all of that equipment becomes immediately vulnerable. This means it is being moved there not for storage, but for immediate employment. The transfer is being conducted under cover of the Easter ceasefire, with the aim of transitioning directly to an offensive the moment the truce expires. According to available data, the axis of advance points toward Orikhiv, Voskresenka, and Verkhnya Tersa. The operational pattern is typical of Russian offensive actions. First, a series of massed air and missile strikes to suppress defenses and disrupt logistics. Then, the ground offensive follows. The coming offensive will likely be a short but decisive operation, running approximately from April 13th through the May holidays, aimed at seizing bridgeheads for a larger-scale summer offensive. The front line, sector-by-sector overview. Sumy sector, Russian units continue to intensify pressure toward the city of Sumy. Mapping services are publishing updates along the second defensive line, the Kotin and Marina areas. Russian forces have entered the forest tract between Mala Korchakovka and Krapivshchina, consolidating positions for a further push through dense woodland toward the city. In parallel, several mapping sources are recording advances near Mirolyubske. Russia's Ministry of Defense officially confirmed control over this settlement yesterday, and today's data is refining the picture further. The overall configuration suggests an attempt to envelop Uroidi from two bridgeheads simultaneously, from the northeast and the southeast. Kharkiv axis. Video footage from the Volokhovka area has been emerging for 2 consecutive days. The Russian army is systematically striking Ukrainian storage facilities and temporary deployment points in this area. It is from here that Ukrainian forces supply the grouping holding the forest tract along the state border. The heaviest fighting on the Kharkiv axis is currently concentrated around this forest tract. Russia's strategic goal is to straighten the front line between the Vovchansk bridgehead and the extreme northeastern corner of Kharkiv Oblast, then develop the advance toward Bilyi Kolodya. The situation at Pechenihi Reservoir warrants separate attention. Reports emerged yesterday of airstrikes against the dam. According to a number of analysts, if Russian units manage to breach Ukraine's defense in this sector, there is a serious risk of a critical incident at the dam. The consequences would be large-scale flooding across significant territories, disruption of road infrastructure, and a severe blow to Ukrainian logistics in this direction, which would effectively create an additional operational corridor for Russian movement. Kupiansk sector, pro-Western mapping services are publishing corrections to the eastern pocket, east of Kovsharovka and Novosinova. Russia's Ministry of Defense has officially declared these territories under its control for some time. However, fresh footage from Russian FPV operators in the Kovsharovka area shows ongoing strikes against Ukrainian positions in these same settlements. The authors of the published video state the strike targeted a Ukrainian drone command post. This indicates that Ukraine is maintaining a real presence east of the Oskil River, despite official statements to the contrary. Sloviansk sector, heavy strikes on Kramatorsk are being recorded today. Near Dubrova, Russian units succeeded in significantly improving their positions the day before. Analysts, including pro-Western ones, are converging on the assessment that Russia intends in the near term to establish full fire control over Dubrova using aviation and drones. The end goal, to cut the Sloviansk-Kostiantynivka agglomeration into isolated segments and address each separately. This is the classic tactic of fracturing a defense before systematically absorbing individual settlements. Noteworthy footage has emerged from the Kostiantynivka area, published by the Ukrainian side. The footage shows a Ukrainian drone equipped with light firearms shooting down a Russian drone with a single shot at safe distance, then continuing on its patrol route. Technologically, it is still a relatively rudimentary solution, improvised as the saying goes. But the fundamental point is this: the interceptor drone is reusable. It does not destroy itself along with its target. That changes the logic of drone countermeasures entirely, making it not only more effective, but significantly cheaper. And this brings us to the central thesis of the current phase of the war. Both sides have entered a stage of deep resource exhaustion. The side whose war economy proves more efficient at lower cost will prevail. That is precisely why Russia is investing in machine vision drones. One system with a guaranteed strike outcome instead of 10 with uncertain results. That is precisely why Ukraine is developing reusable interceptors instead of single-use munitions. Whoever solves the problem of maximum cost reduction while maintaining combat effectiveness first will hold the strategic advantage in the final stretch of this war. Zaporizhzhia sector. The map is gradually shifting. Russian units have been recorded on the territory of Vodiana, Mine No. 2. Ukraine published footage of strikes on their forward positions on the facility's perimeter. Movement is developing in the direction of Zaporizhzhia, Shevchenko, Svitle, Chervonivka, and Krasnopolye. Rodinska 2 mine appears set to serve as a Russian staging point for force build-up ahead of a further push northward. The pace remains modest, but the direction is clearly traceable. Zaporizhzhia axis. Summary. This is where the most significant concentration of Russian reserves is being observed. Immediately upon the expiry of the Easter ceasefire, a transition to massed air and missile strikes is expected, followed by, or simultaneous with, a ground offensive toward Orikhiv, Verkhnya Tersa, and Voskresenka. No high-intensity activity is expected in the next 24 hours while the truce holds, but by midnight on April 12th, combat operations will in all likelihood resume, and by the morning of the 13th, intensity could spike sharply. The Middle East. Direct US-Iran talks in Pakistan. Turning to the Middle East, where today an event is unfolding that could define the trajectory of one of the region's key conflicts. US and Iranian delegations have gathered in Pakistan for direct negotiations. US Vice President J.D. Vance has already arrived. Pakistan is providing the venue and receiving both delegations. The American delegation is exceptionally high-powered. Vance, Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner, and CENTCOM Commander General Brandon Cooper. The Iranian side is represented by the Foreign Minister, the Speaker of Parliament, and the Chairman of the National Security Council. Iran's delegation is lower in rank than America's, and this is not incidental. As a result of Israeli and coalition strikes over recent months, a significant portion of Iran's senior leadership has been effectively eliminated. Officials occupying higher positions are simply unwilling to leave their secure locations and reveal their whereabouts. Trump delivered maximally hardline statements. If a deal is not reached today, the consequences will be extremely serious. He also made clear that Iranian negotiators are alive solely because they are needed for these talks. At the same time, the US deployed diplomatic incentives. $6 billion in frozen Iranian assets have been unfrozen, and Qatar and South Korea are preparing to transfer these funds to Tehran. In parallel, Netanyahu, citing his conversation with Trump, ordered a reduction in strike intensity against Lebanon, with every operation in that direction now requiring his personal authorization. The conditions for reaching a deal are being maximally engineered. Yet US military activity in the region is not declining. If anything, it is increasing. Since the beginning of the Middle Eastern ceasefire, over 70 military transport aircraft have been recorded heading into the conflict zone, from both Europe and the continental United States. Additional warships and carrier strike groups are being redeployed to the region. It appears that over the past several days, the US has at least partially replenished the munitions, missiles, bombs, and other materiel expended during the previous phase of operations. Should talks collapse, Washington will enter a potential second phase in a fundamentally superior state of readiness compared to the start of the first. For Iran, given its losses in command personnel and resource exhaustion, such a scenario would be significantly more devastating. One additional factor deserves mention. US oil exports are currently near multi-year highs. The ongoing tension in the Middle East is objectively beneficial to Washington from an economic standpoint. This does not mean the US has no interest in a deal, but it does mean Washington feels no acute pressure to rush one through at any price. Israel, meanwhile, continues methodically expanding its buffer zone. The Litani River, which many analysts identify as the informal threshold for concluding the Lebanese dimension of the conflict, remains well out of reach. Until that line is crossed, speaking of any durable ceasefire is premature. The next 24 hours could genuinely prove decisive. We are watching the talks in Islamabad closely. Hungary, parliamentary elections, and Washington's stake. We will close today's briefing with an event that will directly affect the political map of Europe. This weekend, parliamentary elections are taking place in Hungary, and the political future of Viktor Orban hangs on their outcome. Trump has already made an unambiguous statement. If Orban retains power, the United States is prepared for large-scale investment in the Hungarian economy. This is an open bet by Washington on a specific political outcome in a European country, and it will have consequences regardless of whether the prediction holds. Tomorrow is shaping up to be another intense day across multiple fronts. That wraps up today's briefing. The situation is moving fast. Stay tuned to the channel for updates. If this was useful, leave a like and subscribe. See you in the next one.